I'm not affiliated with the Tour de Palm Springs in any way. You're going to start the ride in downtown Palm Springs, but after a few miles you're going to make a left onto Garnet. This is where it starts feeling like you're in the desert. You can split the ride into two halves. The first half is out in the desert. It's rough. There's a narrow shoulder with a lot of sand and grit on it. There's less traffic and there's a lot fewer stoplights. The second half of the ride is more urban. It's characterized by smoother pavement and wider shoulders. However, there's a lot more traffic and a lot more stoplights, some of them 2 to 3 minutes long. There isn't a lot of climbing on this route, about 3,200 feet. Most of it's in the first half. You don't really notice the slow climbing in the second half of the route. You notice this hill though. It's about 200 yards at 8%. I rode this event in 1999, the first year they offered a century option. It started and ended near a church. About 100 miles into the ride, the group I was in saw a church ahead. Some of them were saying, "Hey, there's the end, we're almost done." I looked at my cue sheet and I thought we had a couple of miles to go. When it became evident that the church wasn't the end of the ride, some of the group seemed to get angry. "We've cycled 100 miles, we should be done." These are not endurance cyclists. These are just people who want bragging rights. "I've ridden a century." I don't want to do long distance rides with people like this. I compare it to my first triple century. It was the 300-mile option at the Grand Tour in Malibu, California. You can ride a highland or a lowland option. I opted for the lowland because there's less climbing and it's cooler. About 230 miles into the ride, the two routes come together. And while I was at the rest stop there, another club rider, Paul, arrived too. He had chosen the highland option, which shows you what a strong cyclist he is. He'd ridden the highland in the same time it took me to ride the lowland. Not only that, he'd got lost twice. This was before GPS. So he'd ridden an extra 12 miles. His attitude was, "Hey, I got 12 bonus miles and I didn't even pay for them." We rode back together, he doing most of the work, and in a really upbeat mood. Paul's the kind of guy I like to ride with. I also rode this ride in 2000. I used it to experiment how far I could ride without taking on food. By mile 50 I was completely spent. I could barely keep the bike upright. There was a rest stop there, so I decided to eat. Even though I ate as much as I could, I never got my strength back till almost at the end of the ride. The deeper into calorie debt you go, the longer it takes to recover. Here we are at the top of the ride. It's about 1,700 feet. We make a right at the stop sign and start heading east. Eventually we end up on Dillon Road, which used to be really nice, but has a lot more traffic now. I was planning on eating at a place called Empire Burgers, but it didn't look great on Google Maps, and a couple of miles before I got there, I saw this Mexican food truck. I ordered a cheese quesadilla. While I was waiting, I checked out this guy selling Mexican pottery. It's probably a good thing I didn't have the ability to take any of it home with me. Lunch arrived, and it was simple but good. After lunch I stayed on Dillon quite a bit longer. The wind came up and started blowing dust around, and the shoulder changed from moderate to wonderful. There's a long downhill with a wide, smooth shoulder, and then that shoulder disappears and the road becomes crap. I'm pretty sure when we crossed that river we entered a new city, and that city hasn't maintained its roads for 100 years. Thank goodness it's only like this for a mile or so. Now we enter the more urban part of the ride. We're basically turning north, then west, then north, then west again, making our way back to Palm Springs. At the Vons store I did something I've never done before and I always wanted to try. I took my Brompton into the store. Nobody cared. I walked around the store, pushing my Brompton. Nobody cared. It was wonderful. Even though there were good shoulders and bike lanes most of the way back, There were some areas where the lanes were too narrow, there was no shoulder, and there was way too much traffic, so I felt more comfortable riding on the sidewalk. About 17 miles into the ride, you're going to be turning to the east into the rising sun. Sunrise is at 6:35. If you take the 6:15 start and you're a strong climber, you may turn into the sun while it's still low on the horizon. Obviously, this can blind motorists coming up behind you. If you are a strong climber, I would recommend taking the latest start you can get to avoid this problem. On my ride, I had the opposite problem. I found myself riding west into the setting sun, and I opted to use the sidewalk quite a lot until I got the sun down behind the mountains. I still have a few miles to go, but my camera's memory is almost full. So here are my thoughts on this route. There's a lot to see and do in Palm Springs. Bring the family. Your wife can easily spend enough money to make your $100 entry fee seem insignificant. The first half of the route is rough, and there's a lot of sand you'll need to ride through. 28mm are an absolute minimum. I rode 35 and I thought it was rough. Traffic was heavier than I remember, but all of the drivers were courteous. I calculated I spent about 30 minutes waiting at red lights. That didn't really bother me. I was grateful for the rest. But this is not a route you're going to set a personal best on. Nonetheless, I think you'll enjoy it.